search warrant affidavit, without going into great detail, demonstrates that Mr. Malinowski did purchase 142 guns from 2019 to February 27, 2024. He resold at least 9, because we have the 6 plus the 3 to the undercover firearm. He also had, at various times, at various gun shows, 12 or 13 firearms on the table to be sold, and he offered one witness, who was the one convicted of robbery and therefore was a prohibited person, many more firearms than what he purchased. Many of these firearms were purchased just days before they were sold. So whether or not you want to assert, Mr. Cummins, that this was a hobby of his, you agree that there's certainly probable cause to believe that he was selling guns to individuals without a license and without performing a background check because he didn't have a license.
There's no allegation that he knowingly sold a gun to anyone that was prohibited. And
that's not what probable cause.
And under ATF's interpretation of,
but you don't have to. You don't have to do that. I just said that he.
Well, I'm just answering your question.
Selling without a license. Like, there's certainly probable cause that he was in the business of selling without a license.
Under ATF's interpretation of a vague regulation.
But not yours. So you would say that if you purchase 142 firearms within a 4-year span as a former U.S. attorney, and you have evidence of 9 sales within that period of time, plus many other more weapons offered for sale, you would say, as you, not the ATF, as you, as the former U.S. attorney, that there is no probable cause to believe that this person is in the business of selling guns without a license?
I would agree that that could be probable cause.
Thank you. So we have probable cause. The Little Rock police is there with the ATF. They go in, and the one fact that doesn't ever seem to be mentioned here, and that the chairman's letter does not mention, is that an ATF agent was shot.
That's correct.
Is that correct, Mr. Cummins?
That's correct.
Okay. So an ATF agent was shot and then in response fired back at Mr. Malinowski. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and it's also a tragedy.
It is a tragedy. I agree. I agree. And you also agree, I assume. I was an assistant U.S. attorney for 10 years, secured many search warrants, oversaw the execution of them, and arrest warrants. They're routinely done at 6 a.m. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of warrants are executed at 6 a.m. Whether I agree with that as a tactic is another discussion, but yes, that's not uncommon.
No, okay. I want to understand that we're making a big deal out of the 6 a.m. here, but that is the standard time that law enforcement executes arrest warrants and executes search warrants. So I certainly am sorry that this is a tragedy that Mr. Malinowski died. I'm also sorry that Mr. Malinowski shot an ATF agent during a search. And I think if he were truly not in the business of selling firearms, the way to respond to a search warrant is to allow your house to be searched and to cooperate. But it is insane to me that we are sitting here criticizing the ATF because they retaliated with deadly force after someone shot an agent. That is what happened here. This was not an out-of-the-ordinary execution of a search warrant. This is standard operating procedure. Mr. Cummins acknowledges that there was probable cause to do it. And now there is an investigation of this incident. Is that right, Mr. Cummins?
There has been an investigation that's been handed over to the local prosecutor.
So the local prosecutor is investigating it, and you know as a prosecutor that none of the witnesses or the relevant people involved are allowed to discuss this publicly while an investigation is going on, correct?
I don't know what the policy of the ATF is on that.
Well, was it your policy as a prosecutor? It certainly was mine. Witnesses do not talk to the public while there's an investigation going off. One last question. As a U.S. attorney, did you ever send a notification to a target of yours who's buying 140 guns, selling at least 9 of them, that, hey, you're under investigation, just a heads up?
I hope I would have, yes.
You would have? You would have reached out and said, hey, by the way, I'm investigating.
The question
so you can go ahead and destroy and hide all the evidence? You would have done that? You notified the targets that you would have?
The gentleman has expired. The gentleman from North Carolina yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Cummins, with some economy of time, do you wish to respond to the last barrage?
Well, to enforce violations of the law against FFLs, to no longer allow them to fix errors or to improve their compliance. It has no tolerance for these typos and wants to revoke their licenses.
And give me a flavor of the type of errors that might have previously resulted in the ATF working with a license holder and now would result in the agency trying to revoke that license.
I'd love to give you the examples that fly in the face of what the zero tolerance policy says it is, which is prohibited persons and background checks and things like that. But the problem is my client did none of those things that are even stated in the zero tolerance policy, and they're still falling subject to getting revoked. We can talk about a typo of an abbreviation of somebody's name when they shouldn't have done that. We can talk about accidentally listing United States as the country instead of paying attention to the box saying county, things like that.
Well, Ms. Sampson gave testimony that these are essential, that these are necessary regulations to enforce at the finest point. Do you have a response to that testimony?
Some are essential, I agree. The background check requirements, the identification requirements, and making sure we know who the purchaser is, and they're not a prohibited person. But that's not what this exact case I'm dealing with has to do with at all. There are no prohibited persons involved here. There were no missing background checks. There were no missing anything that would actually affect public safety.
In the case I'm aware of in my district, the error wasn't even made by the license holder. The error was made by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement because they were charged with a certain feature of the background check. And so if a license holder has to rely on a state entity to do some portion of the check and they make an error, that certainly shouldn't result in the license holder experiencing a revocation action, should it?
We agree, it should not.
And yet, that's the circumstance. And I'm wondering just how you hear that testimony, Mr. Cummins, as you deal with representing a family that's dealt with such loss at the hands of such a grave error. Does the hypocrisy not ring pretty loud?
Look, I've been in all sides of this. I've been a United States attorney. I prosecuted more gun crimes than probably many prosecutors in the country. It was the #1 priority in the Bush administration to prosecute gun crime, not administrative gun crime, real gun crime, people that are out committing crimes with guns, and we prosecuted a whole bunch of them. I've also been a defense attorney, and I've been with families of people that are in prison. I've been to prisons and met with people. Anybody that thinks that the guns that are being sold in private sales are driving the level of crime we're seeing in our community, on the list of things that are driving the level of crime we see in our community, private gun sales is way down at the bottom. And there's a great number of other things that aren't being discussed here at all that have to be driving it more than...
I want you to be able to respond specifically to Ms. Sampson's testimony that guns make their way from the legal marketplace to the illegal marketplace. Because it seems to me, hearing that testimony, that then you wouldn't attack the people who are trying to legally engage in the legal transfer of firearms, right? You would go after the people engaging in the illegal conduct. But what's your reaction to that testimony?
I agree with that. I think gun crimes are committed by people, not guns, and we need to focus on the people that are committing the crimes, and we need to be asking ourselves, why is this person a criminal? What's their background? I know the answers to a lot of those questions because I've been living it for 35 years, but it doesn't really have much to do with where they acquired the firearm.
And everything we know about the law, for someone to be a criminal, they have to have the intent to commit a crime. They have to have the mens rea, right? And
correct.
Do you worry as you look at some of the ways in which these laws are being weaponized against people, that we're getting away from someone actually wanting to commit a crime, and indeed people are experiencing this really harsh regulatory action when they want to be legally compliant?
I would suggest that the tactics that were used in the Malinowski search would be incompetent and reckless if it was a very serious crime. It's even much more offensive because this is not a serious crime that they suspected. It's probably the lowest level crime that would ever be drug into a United States Attorney's office.
So why did this happen? Is this just to send a message? Is this someone's incompetence? Do you wonder about that?
I wonder about it, and that's probably a question for this committee to answer, not me, but I'm certainly concerned about it, and it makes this tragedy even harder to take, to think that it might be politically motivated or for some other reason.
Thank you. I see I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. I now recognize Ms. Plaskett for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. First, I want to say it's very interesting that we keep talking about the fact that there were no body cams on the ATF officers that were there to execute that warrant. What's very interesting, and I'd like to admit and submit into the record, a letter that's been sent from ATF to Mr. Jim Jordan dated May 21st, 2024, from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Explosives.
Without objection.
Thank you. And in that letter, it reminds this Congress that in 2021, the department directed its law enforcement components, including ATF, to develop plans for a phased implementation of body-worn cameras. But the very thing that they're trying to do, which is to eliminate the ATF, is the reason that they don't have body cams, because they didn't give them the funding for it. Congress has specifically stated in its appropriations that they don't want to fund ATF. They don't want to give them the money to be able to operate. They don't want to give Mr. Klickner's clients sufficient ATF officers to be able to quickly do the kind of paperwork that they need. That's why they're taking so long. They don't want to give them the funding to be able to have body cams. And so ATF has only a third of its individuals who are wearing body cams, and have specifically requested from Congress the funding so that everyone can wear those body cams. And my colleagues have denied that. They're the ones who have said they don't need that money. Let's get rid of ATF. They have legislation to abolish the ATF, the elimination of the ATF Act, abolish the ATF Act, and eliminate this woke, weaponized agency. Everything's woke when you don't like it. Eliminate it, and that way, these are the reasons. So they want to have it both ways. They want to say that they don't have body cams, and that's the reason they're doing, and you know, we feel sorry for people who haven't had the body cams, but they're the reason they don't have them. Point it right back at yourself why those body cams weren't on them, and see if that continues to work for you. But you know, we're also talking about another thing that was discussed, which I found very interesting, was that individuals who are doing this as hobbies. One of the reasons that we changed the rule to the engaged in business rule is because an individual who can have as his primary income a large income can then sell a lot of firearms and not be considered a firearms dealer because their primary income is more than the firearms income that they're doing, even if it's voluminous, the amount of firearm sales that they're making, if their primary income level is higher. And so, a couple of years ago in 2022, President Biden signed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which has, as was one of its rules, a rule with regard to no longer can an individual hide the fact that they are, by all accounts, by a common law person's accounts, an actual firearms dealer and not a hobbyist. And, you know, one of the ways I would look at determining if, in fact, a person is a hobbyist as opposed to a firearms dealer is, you know, Ms. Sampson, in your opinion, is someone who buys and then almost immediately resells at least 150 firearms in a 3-year period a hobbyist or an unlicensed gun dealer?
If that is what a person was doing, then they would be more likely to be an unlicensed gun dealer.
Is it concerning to you if someone sells 150 firearms and conducts no background check on the individuals who are purchasing those firearms?
Yes, because ATF data shows that those unlicensed and unbackground checked sales usually end up going to prohibited purchasers.
I'd like to submit for the record the actual search warrant, the unsealed application for a search warrant, and the affidavit and other information therein, which on page 28 states that as of February 27, 2024, approximately 6 firearms are known to have been recovered in the commission of crimes. Those are related to the firearms from that Mr. Malinowski purchased and then sold.
Mr. Chairman, could I?
No, I'm speaking. It's my time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. And then, in your opinion, Ms. Sampson, would ATF be justified in being concerned when someone sells a firearm to an individual who has been convicted of robbery and is prohibited from owning a gun?
Yes, because selling to a prohibited purchaser is a violation of the law.
In your opinion, would ATF be justified in being concerned
Time to John Lady.
when selling a firearm that lands in the hands of a 15-year-old member of the Nortina criminal street gang?
Yes.
Thank you. I yield back.
John Lady yields back. Mr. Cummins, I think Mr. Stubbe will give you a chance to respond.
Mr. Cummins, you wanted to respond to that?
I just wanted to quickly say,
Is this his time now?
Yes, it's his time.
the ranking member made a misstatement that's been repeated in the press, and I'd just like to correct it. That affidavit refers to approximately, I think it's 142, but call it 150 guns that Mr. Malinowski purchased over 4 years, which I can tell you, I could name a lot of people in Arkansas that have bought 150 firearms in 4 years. It only documents 6, I believe, sales of any firearms in that affidavit, not 150. It documents that he purchased 150 guns, but it only documents that he sold about 6,
Which you're allowed to do in America, right?
as far as I know.
Into the record, the actual warrant, which was not a no-knock warrant. Is it still your testimony that what occurred, the tragedy that occurred with Mr. Malinowski and his family, was a no-knock warrant?
Because body cameras weren't worn and the doorbell camera was covered up, we don't know what happened at the front door. But I would say, based on what we do know, that 57 seconds I described, minus the time to allow for Mr. Malinowski to respond to the crash in the door, and whatever time it took them to knock on the door, if they knocked after they covered up the door, we know that it was 20 or 30 seconds.
But
And my answer is, it's a distinction without a difference.
Well,
if all you
okay.
hear is a crash,
All right, but for the record,
what do you know?
but for the record, you're a lawyer.
Yeah,
The warrant filed was not a no-knock warrant.
not on its face.
That's
No,
right.
sir.
Thank you. Just want to clarify that. Ms. Sampson, Mr. Cummins described really a horror that should not occur to any American citizen or American resident. Is there, however, a distinction in the solution? The solution before us today is abolish the agency because they engaged in behavior that was brutal or violent or beyond acceptable norms. Do you believe that's the solution?
Absolutely not.
So the very same people who condemned those who called for that solution with the Minneapolis Police Department after the George Floyd tragedy have a different solution today for ATF. For some reason, this particular police force ought to be abolished and no other, even if they also engage in violent behavior, brutality, and violation of the law. Do you note the irony?
I do, and with respect to the ongoing investigation, that's not what my area of expertise is. We, of course, believe in accountability because we live in a democracy. So there should be accountability and investigation.
Right, but the solution isn't to abolish the agency.
Exactly.
In fact, the agency has some very important missions, as Chairman Issa just indicated. He said, no, we need ATF. I agree with him. Reform it, yes. Abolish it, very different kind of answer. What would happen if we abolish the ATF? What kinds of consequences might flow from that?
There will be consequences for all Americans. First and foremost, we would lose the only federal agency responsible for making sure that firearms are not trafficked into our streets.
Maybe that's why some people don't like the ATF, that particular charge, that they don't want regulation of arms of any kind, and they don't like the federal agency that has that mission, which may be why for so many years they've blocked the confirmation of an ATF director?
That could be. All I know is that ATF is the only federal agency that we have, and we're dealing with epidemic gun violence.
Well, let's look at that. So if we abolish it, would that make it easier for criminal cartels to traffic firearms in this country?
Yes.
If we abolish it, would that, in fact, strengthen Mexican cartels engaged in human trafficking, drug trafficking, and arms trafficking?
Yes.
Would we expect more assault weapons to be funneled to the black market if some of my colleagues succeeded in abolishing the ATF?
Yes.
Could it affect violent crime in the United States?
Absolutely. Yes.
How so?
Well, ATF right now, as I said, they are responsible for regulating the industry. And so we know that almost every gun starts out in the legal market, and it's funneled from the legal market, which are FFLs who are regulated by ATF, into the illegal market. So if ATF is no longer there, then that channel, which is already larger than it should be, would overwhelmingly increase, and we would have more guns and more gun violence.
So if we abolish ATF, as the chairman of this select committee, not Mr. Issa, want to do, and that is supported by an agency that gave him an A+ rating, Gun Owners of America, that actually sells merchandise calling for abolish the ATF. If we did that, it's your testimony, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that it would actually make Americans less safe and would remove the only federal agency charged with trying to protect them from firearm violence and trafficking in America.
Yes, that is true.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Klegner, what is the ATF's zero tolerance policy?
It is a